Before we jump into this story, I need to give you a heads up. This tale dives into some heavy, mature themes: new motherhood, messy family dynamics, and the gut-wrenching reality of infidelity. If these topics hit too close to home or make you uneasy, now might be the time to step back. Have you ever been blindsided by something so big it made you question everything you thought you knew? What if something that started as innocent, a playful joke, a little teasing, or a few lingering glances, snowballed into something you couldn't ignore? Could you stop yourself before it went too far, or would curiosity pull you in? I told myself I had it all under control, until I didn't. Let me take you back to the beginning, to where it all started. And as you listen, ask yourself, what would you have done in my shoes? That morning, I stood frozen in my kitchen, my fingers absently tracing the smooth, cool edge of the granite countertop. The low hum of the fridge seemed louder than usual, almost like it was amplifying the silence in the house. Maybe it was because the quiet felt so heavy, or maybe it was because the stillness made everything that had led to this moment feel even more suffocating. This house, this life, this very moment, it felt like, for the first time in forever, things were finally falling into place. Stability, something I'd craved for years, had finally found its way to me. Stability was a dream I'd chased for as long as I could remember. For years, it was just me and my son, Ethan, bouncing from one cramped apartment to another, scraping by, stretching every dollar until it nearly snapped. I'd sit on that old, beat-up couch at night, staring at a pile of bills I couldn't pay, silently praying Ethan wouldn't notice the fear I was trying so hard to hide. But he always did. Even as a little kid, Ethan had this way of seeing right through me. He'd climb into my lap, wrap his little arms around me, and whisper, "It's gonna be okay, Mom." And somehow, in those moments, it always felt like it would be. Ethan's dad had disappeared before he even turned one. No big fight, no tearful goodbye, just a man who walked out of our lives and never looked back. For years, I wondered if I'd start to see traces of him in Ethan as he grew older. Would his mannerisms, his personality, remind me of the man I'd once known? But Ethan was different. He didn't have that cold detachment or that restless urge to run that had defined his father. No, Ethan stayed. He was present. Back then, we lived in such tight quarters that privacy was a luxury we couldn't afford. Keeping secrets? Impossible. Not that we ever tried. We talked about everything. Nothing was off limits, no matter how awkward or uncomfortable. I gave him honest answers, and in return, Ethan shared things with me that most kids would never tell their parents. That's just how it was between us. We leaned on each other, and that bond never wavered, even as he grew taller and stronger. And man, did he grow. While other boys his age were out pushing boundaries and getting into trouble, Ethan was right there with me. He actually enjoyed spending time together, talking, laughing, cracking jokes. And not just any jokes, but the kind that were so bad they were funny. I'd laugh harder than I should have, but it felt good. It felt real. Maybe that's why I threw myself into fitness so hard. It wasn't just about looking good or getting in shape, though those things mattered. It was about feeling strong, capable, and in control of my life. I needed to prove to myself that no matter what life threw at me next, I could handle it. So every morning, I ran. I lifted weights. I started treating my body with the care and respect it had been missing for so long. And slowly, it worked. I felt better. I looked better. People noticed. I noticed. And with that newfound confidence came something else. A hunger for more than just survival. I wanted to live, to thrive. That's when I bought this house. A real home, with space, light, and peace. It felt like a fresh start, and I promised myself I wouldn't feel guilty about it. I'd earned it. I deserved it. And Ethan deserved it too. Then came the hot tub. At first, the idea of spending that much money on something so indulgent felt ridiculous. But after everything I'd been through, the struggles, the heartaches, the sacrifices, I wanted something just for me. Something that felt like a treat. When I told Ethan about it before ordering, he just smiled and said, "Go for it, Mom. Treat yourself." I hadn't expected him to care much, but surprisingly, I was excited. The night the hot tub was installed, I couldn't wait to get in. I soaked in the warm, bubbling water until my fingers were pruny. It felt like a small victory, a symbol that I'd finally made it. I'd built a life where I could indulge in something just because I wanted it, without guilt or hesitation. By the weekend, I was eager to share it with Ethan. I kept casually mentioning it, telling him how amazing it felt, how the warm water would be perfect for soothing his sore muscles after his workouts. I wanted him to experience it too. It was a new chapter, one I hoped we could enjoy together. At first, he shrugged it off, saying he probably wouldn't use it. But after dinner that night, when I asked one last time, he finally caved. That should have been it, just a fun moment, a mother and son enjoying something together. But when I went to change into my bikini, something felt off. Not wrong, exactly, just different. I found myself lingering in front of the mirror longer than usual, adjusting the straps, smoothing down my hair. I told myself I was just excited about the hot tub, that it was silly to overthink it. Still, when I carried our drinks outside, my hands weren't quite steady. The air felt warmer. The air felt warmer than it should have, even with the soft breeze rustling through the yard. I stepped outside carefully, balancing 2 glasses in my hands, making sure not to spill a drop as I set them on the edge of the hot tub. And that's when it all truly began. Ethan was already in the hot tub by the time I stepped out, leaning back against the smooth, curved shell like he'd been doing this forever. His posture was completely relaxed, shoulders loose, eyes half-lidded, as if the weight of the world had lifted, at least for a little while. It had been a long time since I'd seen him that at ease. "Told you it would be nice," I said, slipping off my sandals and reaching for the knot on my robe. With a slow pull, I untied it, letting the soft fabric glide down my shoulders, revealing the black bikini I'd picked out earlier. His eyes flicked up for the briefest second before darting back down to the bubbling water. I pretended not to notice. Instead, I dipped my toes into the tub, savoring the initial warmth before easing in fully. "It's better than I thought," he murmured, swirling his drink idly in his hand. "But I'm keeping this spot. Feels like the jets are hitting just right." "Oh, really?" I lowered myself into the steaming water, leaning back against the edge as the heat wrapped around me, soothing muscles I hadn't even realized were tense. "Well, don't get too comfortable. I plan on reclaiming my spot." "You snooze, you lose," he shot back, flashing me a mischievous grin. I rolled my eyes but couldn't help smiling. It had been a while since we'd sat together like this, just talking, unwinding, laughing. It reminded me of the nights we used to spend curled up on the couch watching old sitcoms, his feet always creeping over to my side until I eventually gave up and let him stretch out. Only this felt different. Was it the warmth? The way the water made every movement slower, more deliberate? Or maybe it was the way his broad shoulders filled out his side of the tub, making it look almost too small for him. "Fine," I said, scooting closer. "If you're not moving, then at least let me see what's so special about this spot." We swapped places, and the second I settled in, I knew I'd made a mistake. The jets hit every spot perfectly, my lower back, my shoulders, my legs. A deep sigh slipped from my lips as I melted into the sensation. Ethan smirked knowingly. "Told you," he said, lifting his glass for another sip. "You're not getting it back now." "Oh, you wanna bet?" I teased, reaching over as if to grab his arm. He pulled away, laughing, but I didn't stop. Before I knew it, we were playfully wrestling, splashing water over the sides as I grabbed for him and he swatted my hands away. All right, he chuckled, holding his drink up like a peace offering. "You win. Just sit down already." "Gladly," I said, and without thinking, I sank down right onto his lap. The laughter stopped. The energy shifted in an instant. I felt it immediately, the firmness pressed against me, the slight tension in his body. My heart stammered in my chest, but I didn't move. Neither did he. I told myself it was nothing, just the heat, the water, the closeness, that's all. But then I shifted slightly, trying to adjust, trying to make myself comfortable, and the more I moved, the more undeniable it became. "Sorry," he muttered suddenly, his voice low, almost unsteady. "I didn't mean to." "It's fine," I cut in quickly, trying to sound casual. "It's just the jets. Relax." But he didn't look relaxed. His face was flushed, and he wouldn't meet my eyes. I should have felt guilty, and maybe deep down I did, but underneath that guilt, there was something else, something unexpected. Excitement. I liked the way he looked at me in that moment, nervous, uncertain, as if I had some kind of power I hadn't even realized I possessed until now. "You know," I said, breaking the silence, "this wouldn't have happened if you'd just given me my seat back." That made him laugh, and the tension eased, but it didn't completely disappear. A second later, he slid out from under me, muttering something about needing another drink, and climbed out of the tub. I watched him go, my gaze lingering lower than it should have, trailing over the muscles of his back, the way the water clung to his skin before dripping away. And when he disappeared inside, I let out a slow, shaky breath. What was that? I leaned back against the edge, my body still buzzing. Maybe it was nothing, just a weird, harmless moment. The heat, the drinks, the way the small space forced us closer than usual. That had to be it. But even as I tried to brush it off, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The way he had felt beneath me, the way his eyes had widened before he quickly looked away. Because in that fleeting moment, I had felt something I hadn't in a long time. Alive. By the time he came back outside, the moment had passed. On the surface, things were back to normal, but my thoughts weren't. They lingered, playing on an endless loop in my mind, making me question everything. Was it as innocent as I was trying to convince myself it was? Or was there something else there, something I wasn't ready to name? If you've made it this far, thank you for sticking with me. I know this isn't the easiest story to hear, and I appreciate you taking the time to listen. If you're finding this interesting or think someone might relate to what I'm sharing, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe. It really helps me keep telling stories like this and reminds me that I'm not alone out here. Now, let's get back to it. I told myself it was nothing, just a fluke, a meaningless, heat-induced moment brought on by the alcohol and the bubbling water. That's all it was. But the next morning, I woke up replaying it over and over again. The way he had looked at me, nervous, embarrassed, and maybe something else. And the way I had felt, giddy, flattered, and undeniably curious. I didn't plan to tease him, not at first. But the idea took root, and once it did, it was impossible to ignore. So it started small, like wearing a thin tank top with no bra while I made breakfast, just to see if he'd notice. He didn't say anything at first, not a single comment, no teasing remark. But I caught him looking, a quick glance so fleeting it would have been easy to miss if I hadn't been paying attention. But I was. And that single glance sent a thrill through me, sharp and unexpected, curling low in my stomach. That thrill, it became a habit. Sweatpants were replaced with leggings, the kind that hugged every curve. High-neck tops were swapped for low-cut ones. I bent over more when I grabbed things, stretched longer when I knew he was watching, found reasons to brush past him just a little closer than necessary. I told myself it was harmless, just a bit of fun, a game. But the more I played, the more I liked it. By the time Christmas rolled around, things between us felt different. The air was heavier, charged with something unspoken. It wasn't just the outfits or the lingering glances anymore. It was the way our conversations stretched longer, the teasing that edged too close to something else, like the way he started pushing back just enough to test me, the way. "Careful, Mom," Ethan murmured one evening as I leaned over the back of the couch, wearing nothing but leggings and a tank top. "You're going to make someone stay." "Oh, please," I rolled my eyes, scoffing at his joke. "You think after 20 years you'd be used to me by now." "Doesn't mean I'm blind," he said. That stopped me. He said it so casually, like it was nothing, like it wasn't the kind of comment that should have made my stomach flip. I turned away before he could see my face, but the heat stayed with me. That night at dinner, the hot tub came up again. I didn't even have to ask this time. He grabbed the drinks and towels before I could say a word. I picked a pink bikini, smaller than the black one I'd worn last time. I waited outside, listening for the sliding door before I turned. His eyes flicked downward just for a second, but it was enough to make me smile. "Jesus, Mom," he muttered, handing me my drink. "You're about to fall out of that thing." "Oh, stop," I laughed, sinking into the steaming water. "I wouldn't want to traumatize you." He smirked. "It'd be more traumatizing for you. Trust me." The words hung between us, thick and heavy, like the steam rising off the water. I didn't push, and neither did he, but the tension was there, pulsing, impossible to ignore. I joked about switching seats again, just to see what he'd say. "No way," he shot back immediately, shaking his head. "Not after last time." "Oh." I tilted my head. "What happened last time?" "You know." His face turned red. Man, you decided to join the party," he groaned, scrubbing a hand over his face. I laughed, maybe a little too much. "I'm flattered," I added, just to see his reaction. He turned even redder. I let it drop, but later, when he climbed out of the tub and I caught a glimpse of him through the wet fabric of his shorts, that same thrill hit me all over again. After Christmas, I found another excuse to test the waters, a sauna. I had ordered it as a gift to myself, a small home setup that required some assembly. Ethan offered to put it together. I made sure to stay close while he worked, leaning against the doorway in a crop top and shorts, watching the muscles in his arms flex as he tightened the screws. "Oh, Mr. Handyman," I purred, trailing my fingers lightly down his arm. "How will I ever repay you?" He laughed it off, but I saw the way his eyes dipped to my legs before he quickly turned back to the instructions. I let the moment hang between us just long enough before stepping back. The next day, when he finished building it, I asked if he wanted to try it out with me. He hesitated just for a beat until I added, "Come on, you built it. You should at least enjoy it." That did the trick. I wore tiny shorts and a tank top with no bra, just enough to keep the game going. When he showed up, he was in gym shorts, no shirt, and for the first time, I didn't see the boy I had raised. I saw a man. The space inside the sauna was tight. We squeezed in, our legs brushing as we sat side by side. My pulse picked up, but I forced myself to lean back, keeping my voice light. "You've done such a great job in here," I said, stretching lazily. "Are you sure there's nothing more I can do?" He grinned. "Well, I do have a big problem you could take care of." I blinked, caught off guard. Before I could say anything, he waved it off. "Kidding." I was kidding. I smirked, thought our little visit was just for fun. I tilted my chin toward his shorts. His eyes flicked to my chest just for a second, but it was enough. "Well," he murmured, his voice a little rough, "you're not the only one with visitors." He nodded toward my chest. I glanced down, noticing how my nipples had hardened beneath the thin fabric. I pushed my chest forward slightly, smiling. It's natural after a workout. The timer dinged, shattering the moment. He stood first, and I followed, rushing against him as we stepped out. He didn't move away. "Maybe I'll work out with you next time," he said, grinning. I smiled back. "I'd love that." The words felt heavier than they should have. I went to bed that night feeling restless. A part of me wanted to stop, draw a line, go back to normal. But another part of me wanted to see just how far I could push before something finally snapped. I didn't mean to bring it up, not the way it happened. But after everything, the teasing, the sauna, the looks, I couldn't ignore it anymore. And neither could he. It started in the kitchen. I was rinsing dishes, still in my tank top and shorts from my morning workout, when Ethan stepped up behind me. His hand brushed my lower back, just lightly, just for a second, as he reached for a glass. But it wasn't an accident. The pressure was too deliberate, too intentional, like a test to see what I would do. I froze for half a second, heat rushing to my face, but I didn't move away. "Your headlights are on," he said, nodding toward my chest with a smirk. "Oh, you noticed?" I shot back, trying to keep my voice steady. Kind of hard not to. And that's when it happened. For the first time, he hesitated, not in a flustered, embarrassed way, but like he was trying to find the right words, like he was carefully picking through what he was allowed to say and what would cross the line. The air felt thick, charged, like the whole house had suddenly gone silent. He was asking for permission, testing the waters, and I realized in that moment I couldn't pretend anymore that this was all in my head. "Words don't matter," I said finally, my voice lower than before. "Say whatever you want. If something crosses a line, we'll just call it a bad joke and move on." He exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding his breath, relieved but still nervous. I could see it all over his face, his mind racing, trying to figure out what this meant, what it allowed. So I pushed just a little further. "What about touching?" I asked, tilting my head. "What's okay with that?" He swallowed, his throat bobbing. "I don't know. I'm fine with hands," I murmured, holding his gaze. "But only on my butt. And only if I can do the same." He laughed, sharp and nervous, but he nodded. "Deal." I told myself it was innocent, just a silly agreement between two people who'd always been close. But the moment felt heavier than that. My stomach flipped as I turned back to the dishes, pretending I didn't feel his eyes still on me. It didn't take long before we tested it. That night, I was loading the dishwasher when I felt his hand brush against my hip, quick, barely there, but deliberate. I straightened up, startled, and bumped right into him. He didn't back away. Instead, he pressed just enough that I could feel him, solid, warm, close. I looked up at him, my eyes wide. "Someone's feeling bold," I murmured, my voice lower than I meant it to be. "You said it was okay," he shot back, but his face was red. "And it is," I smirked, then turned away. But the heat didn't fade, not even after he left to meet up with friends. That night, I went through my closet, pulling out skirts, dresses, tops I hadn't worn in years. I wanted him to notice. I wanted to keep pushing. The next morning, I decided to push things even further. I came downstairs in one of my shortest skirts, the hem brushing high on my thighs. The blouse I wore was loose but unbuttoned just enough to leave something to the imagination, and underneath, no bra. Ethan was already in the kitchen, still in his boxers. When he turned around, his jaw actually dropped. "Is that for me?" he asked, half joking but still staring. I smiled. "I figured my outfit should match yours." I stepped closer, watching the way his expression shifted. The teasing grin was still there, but his eyes, dark, searching, weren't joking anymore. When he passed me, his hand brushed my lower back again. This time, I leaned into it just enough to let him know I liked it. It kept happening, touches that lasted just a little too long, glances that lingered, compliments that danced right on the edge of what we both knew was too far. He got bolder, and so did I. "You're going to get me in trouble," he muttered one night after I bent over in front of him to grab something off the floor. I straightened up, meeting his gaze. "Maybe I want to." His eyes flicked down just for a second. "Careful," he warned, but his voice didn't sound careful. It sounded excited. By the end of the week, it wasn't just comments or accidental touches anymore. It was hugs that lasted too long, rushing past each other in the hallway when there was plenty of space to walk, his hands lingering on my hips when he reached around me to grab something. And every time it happened, I felt it, that same thrill, that same rush of heat and curiosity, that same dangerous, delicious pull that made me want more. But we always pulled back. We'd laugh it off, make a joke, pretend it didn't mean anything. But I think we were both scared of what it meant, scared of what it could turn into if we didn't stop. But neither of us wanted to stop. "Not yet. I don't know what's happening," he admitted one night as we sat on the couch, pretending to watch TV. "Me neither," I said. I stretched my legs across his lap, settling in. "But it feels good." That part one didn't say, but he did. "Yeah," he murmured, staring at the screen but not really seeing it. "It does." We left it at that. No promises, no decisions, just an unspoken agreement to keep going, to keep teasing, to see where it would lead. And as much as I told myself I'd keep it playful, I couldn't help but wonder, how long could we really hold back? I didn't expect it to happen that night. It wasn't planned, but maybe that's what made it impossible to stop. We were sitting in the living room, just the two of us. The TV was on, but neither of us was really watching. My legs were stretched out, resting across his lap, and he was absent-mindedly tracing circles on my ankle. It wasn't the first time we'd sat like that, but this time felt different. He wasn't joking. He wasn't teasing. And neither was I. I could feel it, the tension, thick and heavy, wrapping around us like something alive. Neither of us spoke, not at first. We just sat there, the air between us charged with everything unspoken, until Ethan finally exhaled, sharp and unsteady, breaking the silence. "I don't get it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I swallowed. "Get what?" Like I didn't already know. His hand twitched against his knee. "Us. I don't get what's happening, and it's freaking me out." I pulled my legs back, sitting up straighter so I could face him fully. He wasn't looking at me, his eyes were locked on the floor, his fingers gripping his knees like he was physically holding himself together. "You're not the only one," I admitted, my voice barely louder than his. Even so, it felt too loud in the quiet of the room. "I've been trying to figure it out too." Slowly, he looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw something raw in his expression, something that made my stomach twist. "It's not just me, right?" he asked. "I mean, I'm not imagining this." "No," I said, shaking my head. "You're not." Silence again, but this time it was worse. It felt dangerous, like one wrong word would send everything crashing down. I should have ended it there, laughed it off, changed the subject, but I couldn't. I didn't want to. "I feel like I'm losing my mind," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. His frustration was palpable. "Every time I see you, it's like, I don't know. I can't stop thinking about it." He hesitated, his fingers flexing against his jeans. "About you." My breath caught. For a second, I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. And then, before I could stop myself, the words were already slipping out. "You're not the only one," I said again. The truth tasted electric on my tongue. His eyes widened, like he hadn't expected me to say it. Hell, I hadn't expected me to say it. But it was too late now. The truth was out, and there was no taking it back. Ethan swallowed hard. "I don't know what to do with this." His voice was quiet now, almost like he was afraid to say the words. "It's messing with my head. Half the time, I feel like I need to leave the room just to stop thinking about you. And the other half," he trailed off, but I knew exactly what he meant. My skin burned. My pulse thundered. I should have stopped him, should have told him we couldn't keep doing this, that it had to end now. But instead, I said, "It scares me too." And then a pause, a hesitation, because the next words felt even bigger than the last. "But it also," I swallowed, my whole body feeling hot, like my confession had already been spoken, like he could read it on my skin. "It makes me feel alive." The words landed heavy between us, hanging in the air. Neither of us spoke, not for a long moment. Then Ethan exhaled, slow and deep, and leaned back against the couch. "God, Mom," he groaned, dragging his hands down his face. And then he looked at me. "What the hell are we doing?" I held his gaze, and for once, I didn't try to soften it. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I don't want to stop." Something shifted in his expression, like he was searching for something. Permission, reassurance that he wasn't crazy. But all I could give him was the truth. "We keep it light," I murmured. "Like before. No expectations, nothing serious. And if it gets too far, we stop." He nodded slowly, but I could still see the conflict, the war inside him. And if I was being honest, I felt it too. Because I wasn't sure how much longer we could keep pretending this was just teasing, that it was harmless, that we weren't already in too deep. But for now, I needed this, needed the way he looked at me, needed the way he made me feel. "I should go to bed," he said suddenly, standing up and running a hand through his hair. "Yeah," I nodded, but neither of us moved. He lingered just for a second, like he was waiting for me to stop him. But I didn't. And when he finally walked away, I was left alone with my thoughts, wondering if we'd already crossed a line we couldn't come back from. I didn't sleep that night. I tossed and turned, my mind running in endless circles, replaying our conversation over and over until the edges blurred. Part of me felt relief, like a weight had been lifted now that everything was out in the open. I didn't have to pretend anymore. But another part of me felt heavier than ever, because now there was no denying it. I had crossed a line, even if only in my head, and I had no idea how to uncross it. The next morning, I found Ethan in the kitchen. He was already dressed, standing at the counter with a cup of coffee. When he looked up and saw me, we both froze for a split second. I braced myself for the tension, for the awkwardness, for everything to feel different. But it didn't. Instead, it just felt quiet. "Morning," he said, his voice softer than usual. "Good morning," I murmured as I reached for a mug and carefully poured my coffee, making sure my hands stayed steady. But even with the simple act, I could feel the weight of his eyes on me, burning through the silence. My pulse quickened, but this time, I didn't let it show. I was determined not to let him see how much his presence affected me. "Last night," he started to speak, but I stopped him before he could say more. "We need to talk," I said, my voice low but firm. I set my coffee cup down on the counter, the soft clink of it breaking the tension in the air. "But we also need to be completely honest with ourselves." He nodded, though his expression was tense, his brow furrowed as if he wasn't sure where this conversation was headed, as if he couldn't predict what I was about to say. Truthfully, I wasn't sure either. But there was one thing I knew for certain: we couldn't keep pretending like everything was fine. It was obvious that something had shifted between us, and we couldn't keep ignoring it. "That much is clear," I added quietly. His jaw tightened, and I saw his grip on his coffee cup tighten in response, as though he was trying to hold on to something he feared might slip away. "I can't lose you," I whispered, my voice barely above a breath. At my words, his head snapped up to meet my eyes, surprise flashing across his face. "You won't," he replied quickly, stepping closer to me. His voice softened, almost hesitant. "I swear," he added, his gaze searching mine. Then, after a pause, his tone grew even more gentle. "But we can't keep doing this. Whatever this is." I felt a lump form in my throat, and for the first time, I heard the tremor in my own voice. But I forced myself to continue. "It's tearing both of us apart," I confessed, my words fragile but true. Ethan stood frozen, his hands trembling slightly, as if he were bracing himself for the weight of what we were both feeling. I pressed on, unwilling to stop now. "I can't let it get to the point where there's no coming back from it," I said, and I saw something shift in his eyes, perhaps fear, or maybe regret, but something darker lurking behind the surface. "So what do we do now?" His voice cracked ever so slightly, the raw emotion in his tone breaking my heart. I took a steadying breath, gathering my thoughts before responding. "We set boundaries," I said slowly. "Real ones this time." He swallowed hard, his posture stiffening, as if the conversation was forcing him to confront things he wasn't ready to face. "No more touching," I said with determination. "No more teasing. And if either of us feels like we're crossing a line, we speak up immediately. No brushing things under the rug." He nodded slowly, but I could see it in his eyes, the hesitation, the reluctance to let go of whatever this was. I understood that feeling all too well. A part of me didn't want to let go either. But we had to. It was the only way forward. Ethan let out a shaky breath, his eyes searching mine as he reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. "I need you to know," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. This has nothing to do with how I feel about you. I swallowed hard, doing my best to hold his gaze, not allowing my emotions to take control. He stared at me for a moment longer before adding, his voice almost a whisper, you make me feel alive, Mom. And I'll never forget that. And in that moment, despite everything, I didn't want to forget either. His words sank into my chest, a deep warmth that also carried an ache. But this, he exhaled sharply, his head shaking in disbelief. This can't be the way I rediscover that feeling. I nodded slowly, my throat constricted. I need to figure out what's missing in my life, he continued, his grip on my hand tightening just for a fleeting second before he pulled away. Outside of this house. Outside of us. His shoulders dropped slightly, and for the first time in days, I saw him, the boy I raised, the one who trusted me, leaned on me, and looked up to me. Not the man who had been gazing at me as if I were a stranger. I get it, he said, his voice steady now. And I feel the same way. I just didn't know how to say it. A wave of relief washed over me, warm but unsteady. We'll be okay, I promised him, and I truly meant it. But we had to ensure we kept it that way. Ethan pulled me into a hug, tight, comforting, familiar, just like all the ones we'd shared before. But when he pulled away, something felt different, lighter. As though we had both finally let go of the tension that had been holding us down. Weeks passed, and after he left to meet some friends, I found myself standing in front of the mirror, really seeing myself, not just my body, but everything else. The softness in my eyes, the way my hair cascaded around my shoulders, the way my skin seemed to radiate even without makeup. For the first time in years, I felt beautiful, desirable. And it wasn't because of Ethan, not in the way you might think. It was because he had reminded me of what it felt like to be noticed, to be wanted, to be seen. And I promised myself that I wouldn't let that feeling fade. I would find ways to nurture it, through new experiences, through new people, maybe even through a new relationship when I felt ready. But it wouldn't be through him. It couldn't be. When Ethan came back that evening, we fell right back into our usual routine, dinner, TV, casual conversations. And for the first time in a long while, it felt easy again, comfortable. Like we'd found our way back to each other, even if something had been lost in the process. But later, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, a quiet thought began to creep in. What if we had let it go further? What if we had crossed that line? And what if the part of me that still wanted to know never really went away? I don't know where this leaves me. All I know is that it's complicated. That's why I'm sharing this. Maybe someone out there has an insight I haven't considered. Maybe you've been through something like this or know someone who has. If you have, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Because sometimes, when you're in the thick of it, it's hard to see things clearly. And if nothing else, let this be a reminder. Loneliness can lead you down paths you never expected. Pay attention before you cross a line from which you can't return. Thank you for listening. Your thoughts matter, so please don't hesitate to share them. Thank you for staying with us until the end. Before we say goodbye, if you have not yet subscribed, I invite you to press the subscribe button. Your support, even if it seems like a small gesture, means a lot to us and drives us to continue creating content with heart. Don't forget to give it a like if you liked what we shared today, as every interaction helps us grow and allows us to continue connecting with you through stories that matter. Thank you for being part of this community.